early hours of one July morning, 4 men set out on a journey. A journey that would end their lives and the lives of many more. How could they do this? How could 4 citizens of this country do this to their own homeland, to their own fellow citizens? What went into the building of such a degree of hatred and contempt for human life? Their journey ended in violent self-destruction. Our journey begins with the questions. Where do we go from here? What do we do to stop this happening again? Lasting solutions can only be based on a proper understanding of the problems. And so it is that we must try to understand even those things that cannot be excused. If we can defeat the reasons for the inexcusable can be defeated too. Terrorism is not something new. Acts of random violence in which innocents suffer are not new. Many peoples and nations have had to endure terror. The means and methods of terrorism have adapted to modern technology, but its motives and manners are unchanged. Prejudice, intolerance, impatient contempt for others, and utter disregard for the sanctity of human life. In this sense, terrorists can attempt to hijack any philosophical or political ideal, any religion or way of life, any noble cause whatever, and pervert it in order to justify the resort to random acts of violence. However benign or compassionate, however high-minded a cultural tradition may be, there is no guarantee that it will not be hijacked by a perverted few in their determination to excuse the inexcusable. Having said that, most people would agree that the world has entered a new phase since 9/11. The events of that day symbolize what has now become worldwide terrorism. And the agents of this terrorism not only call themselves Muslim, they also claim that their faith allows such acts. Some of them even claim that their faith prescribes such acts. How incomprehensible a claim that is. For Islam is a faith whose very name means peace. A faith that commands peaceful relations with all, regardless of creed or race or nationality. A faith that tells us that life was created out of compassion. A faith that states that the unjust killing of one person is like the killing of all humankind, and that the punishment for it is hell. A faith that from the first called for interreligious dialogue and understanding. O people of the book, come to an agreement between us. A faith whose prophet said, I am sent as a mercy, not as a curse on humankind. Islam is a faith that celebrates the diversity of peoples as one manifestation of God's infinite attributes and a source of richness and blessing. Its scripture teaches us, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another, not that you may hate one another. What an absurdity it is that a faith centered on peace and compassion is associated by terrorists with their commitment to destruction and death. But the radicalized attitudes behind terrorism are capable of hijacking any faith in order to justify the unjustifiable. terror is senseless and indiscriminate, and all are victims, including Muslims. Muslims are just as exposed to the danger of terrorist acts as are all. However, in the West, Muslims are also the primary victims of the backlash, of religious hate, crime, and public contempt. They suffer the indignity of being associated with barbaric violence, and at times are even expected to apologize for crimes with which they have no association whatever. In fact, terrorism is not rooted in any one religion or race or cultural tradition. The only common characteristic of terrorism is that it pursues its goals through indiscriminate violence. Terrorism does not recognize the inherent value of life, and being blinded by hatred and rancor, it is incapable of rational thought. There are certain conditions that give rise to hatred and rancor. Over time, and manipulated by misguided people, these conditions can lead to radicalization and nourish terrorist attitudes and rhetoric. In case of the worldwide terrorism we now face, we can point to a number of conditions as particularly relevant. In the early part of the last century, many peoples engaged in national struggles for independence. Among Muslim populations, Islam was used as a means of motivating people to take up the fight for freedom from foreign occupation. In this way, Islamic identity came to be associated with national or political identity and with patriotic pride. But when these peoples achieved independence as nation-states, they felt betrayed by their new rulers. The new rulers separated themselves from their people. They did not govern for the benefit of the common people or in their interest. They ignored local traditions and ways of life, just as they neglected the people's basic economic and political needs. For the disillusioned masses, Islam became a source of solace and strength, and an argument against their rulers. In this way, Islam became politicized. It became narrower and detached from its moral and spiritual responsibilities. Even now, in this 21st century, many countries and regions in the Muslim world are still ruled by dictatorial regimes. The leaders distrust and disregard their own people, concentrating their energies instead on preserving and strengthening their hold on power. They keep the people under control by restricting education, social progress, and basic freedoms. This intensifies the hatred and animosity the people feel towards their rulers. The people, long deprived and humiliated, are all too easily persuaded that the rich West is to blame for their plight. A substantial number of people in Muslim countries believe that foreign powers are responsible for supporting, protecting, and even installing the ruling elites and dictatorships they suffer from. They therefore blame these foreign powers for much of the deprivation and humiliation they endure. The root of terrorism is not religion or race or nationality. Rather, terrorism finds it easier to develop in the midst of this threefold deprivation. Firstly, a lack of rounded, effective education. Secondly, a lack of basic social and human rights. Thirdly, the lack of opportunity to integrate and interact positively with the wider world. Combined with powerlessness to improve these conditions, such deprivation leads to hopelessness, then resentment and anger at whoever can be blamed. In the hands of terrorists and radicals, this turns into prejudice, hatred, and repugnance towards the West. Evidently, such feelings and perceptions were powerful enough to have permeated the minds and hearts of those British citizens who planned and committed the outrages of 7/7. However well-educated and well-off these citizens may have been themselves, they were nonetheless influenced and affected by the rhetoric which claimed to voice the despair of the Muslim world. Lasting solutions can only be based on a proper understanding of the problems. If the root problem is rightly identified as backwardness, poverty, and isolation, the answer surely lies in sustained efforts to provide opportunities for education, social justice, and dialogue.